She's a motivator, a self-made multimillionaire, spiritual guide to students in over 90 countries, nutritionist and wellness educator, and founder of 3 international schools.
A fine artist whose works can be found in private collections around the world, a fierce defender of children and animals, and a former Wall Street attorney who left the concrete jungle for the tropics over 20 years ago, where her life's mission has been to teach people all over the world how to master their energy, reclaim their personal authority and sovereignty, and develop a real relationship with the true Jesus.
But to us, she's our mom, who loved us unconditionally from birth to now, who has been there for us 24/7 our entire lives without fail, always putting us first.
The mom who protected, nurtured, empowered, and initiated us, making us her number one priority for the past 22 years.
The mom who creates a home filled with love, empowerment, support, and guidance.
Laughter, fun, and really good food. And now, welcome to She Can Have It All with your host, Liana.
Aloha, everyone. Welcome back to She Can Have It All. This is your host, Liana. I'd like to welcome you to episode 2. Today's topic is I am who you say I am. It is as you say. Many of you may be familiar with that from your learning and understanding about Jesus and some of the things that he shared on that topic, because of course, that is something he is very well known for having said. So in order to have it all, which is obviously the theme of this podcast in general, in order to have it all, meaning live your dream life and to experience joy, peace, abundance, and true freedom, you have to know who you are, who you really are, and to never define yourself as who other people project you to be. Now, that's a process because for your entire life, up until you get to a place of healing, you are defining yourself almost entirely by how the people around you have defined you, how your parents projected on you, right? If your parents said you were athletic or artistic, or you talked too much, or you were too quiet, whatever it was, you can probably go through a litany of things that your parents said you were, and then your teachers said that, and then your friends said that, and people said you were the life of the party, or people said you were a wallflower. All of these things formed your definition of who you are. And of course, you know now, if you've been in this community for a while, that you may not be any of those things. You may be some of them, but you're definitely not all of them. Because largely the things that people say about you are mostly about them and their projections. And one of the things about healing is that when you have healed your shadow and you get closer and closer to the truth of who you are, the essence of who you are as a being, you become a mirror. You stop being a projector. When you're not healed, you are projecting yourself, your own self-image, onto everyone around you. So the way that you experience other people is wholly an outward projection through your lens of perception. And your lens of perception does not change. It cannot change until you change the knowing of who you are. So when you believe you're those things that people have told you and you have a false understanding of yourself, you have a pair of glasses on. It's the best way I can explain it. And those are the glasses through which you see everything. And that's how some people can see everything through light and love and find joy and happiness and peace in every day. And other people see nothing but negativity and darkness and sadness. And they're really two extremes. Most people fall somewhere in the middle. But nonetheless, without healing, you are a projector. When you heal, you become a mirror. So you're no longer projecting. You are just existing as the being that you are. And the people around you start to see themselves in your mirror, in your reflection. You're basically reflecting back to them who they are. And that becomes a very powerful way of being in the world. And for most people that I've seen on the healing path, you enter into that stage of being a mirror in different increments. And you might notice you start to trigger certain people and you're thinking, I'm not doing anything. Why are they triggered? And they're being triggered because as you heal yourself, you're polishing little aspects of that mirror and somebody's catching a glimpse of themselves in that aspect, the part that you have healed. And as you continue to heal more and more people around you begin to see themselves. And if they have a very low and negative experience of themselves, that's what they're going to see in you, and they're going to be triggered by you. And so in this journey of becoming a mirror rather than a projector, you are in this state of being known as the hollow bone. That is what it's called in shamanism. It's the hollow bone. You are existing as a clear vessel, which is terminology more akin to Buddhism. But in other words, your transmissions out into the world when you get to that place are pure, meaning they're not based on a cloudy pair of glasses. They're not projections anymore because you don't have any projections. There's nothing to project when you're a hollow bone. You're not seeing things through any specific lens. You're looking at things and you're actually seeing things as they are. And one of the beautiful things, one of the things that I feel the most grateful for in being a hollow bone is that I see everybody's light. And that's, to me, a huge blessing because I'm able to see the profound level of light in the people around me and the people in my community and my students and my friends and my family. So when you become closer to that, you start seeing that too. And you also see people's darkness. You can't not, right? You don't only see the light. You see the darkness and you see it objectively. You don't have an opinion about it. You just look at it and say, okay, this person has mostly light and this is their darkness. And this person has mostly darkness and this is their light. And people are varying degrees of those two things, right? Because light and dark exist on a spectrum, and simplified, it's people are either moving towards light or moving towards dark. There isn't any gray area with that. Everything we do, everything we say, speak, think, act is either moving us a little bit closer to light, to God, to the divine, or moving us a little bit the other way. And obviously, for the majority of people, you are doing a little bit of both. And, we all have. I mean, I talk about that in the context of eating animals for the first 20 years of my life. And surely every time I did that, I was moving closer to dark because I was doing something dark. I was participating in something satanic. I was literally moving closer towards dark. And it took an awakening for me to see that that's what I was doing. So the journey to being a hollow bone is a journey of healing. And that leads me to Jesus saying, I am who you say I am. And I've always been fascinated by that statement of his. And I've always looked at the intricacies of what that really means and what he really truly meant when he said it. And I have asked many times in prayer and meditation to have a deeper understanding and a deeper knowing of what that meant. And over time, I certainly came to understand that he meant people are projecting. People are saying you're this, and that's who you are to them. You can't change that. You can't change who you are to other people. So I understood it on an intellectual level. I even talked about it a lot. I have shared some insight on this topic in the past, but there's so much more nuance to it. And today I had a visceral experience, a download, full body chills in conversation with my family. And that is the impetus for today's episode 2 of She Can Have It All. So I'm just going to share something from the Gospel of Luke where we have this conversation where Jesus says, I am who you say I am. So why does he say that? Well, in Luke 22, it says, Then said they all, Art thou then the Son of God? And Jesus said unto them, Ye say that I am. And Pilate asked him, saying, Art thou the King of the Jews? Jesus answers and said, "Thou say it." The context of Luke 22 is Jesus's trial before the Sanhedrin. So we need to consider the whole passage, and starts at verse 66. When day came, the assembly of the elders of the people gathered together, both chief priests and scribes, and they led him away to their council, and they said, "If you are the Christ, tell us." But he said to them, "If I tell you, you will not believe, and if I ask you, you will not answer. But from now on, the Son of Man shall be seated at the right hand of the power of God." So they all said, "Are you the Son of God then?" And he said to them, "You say that I am." Then they said, "What further testimony do we need? We have heard it ourselves from his own lips." So in verse 67, Jesus confronts the questioner that he already answered them in previous encounters, and with his healings and miracles, the answer should have been accepted. But then in verse 69, he volunteers this important information that his interrogators were trying to find to frame him. So then we go to the trial before Pilate in Luke 23, where in verses 1 through 5, it says, "Then the whole company of them arose and brought him before Pilate. And they began to accuse him, saying, 'We found this man misleading our nation and forbidding us to give tribute to Caesar, and saying that he himself is Christ, a king.' And Pilate asked him, 'Are you the king of the Jews?' And he answered, 'You have said so.' Then Pilate said to the chief priests and the crowds, 'I find no guilt in this man.' But they were urgent. They were saying, 'He stirs up the people, teaching throughout all Judea, from Galilee even to this place.'" So in that situation, Pilate just thought Jesus was an eccentric weirdo, but nothing that he had done wrong. But the crowd was so urgent because they said, "He's stirring up the people, teaching all over the place," right? God forbid. This was very triggering to them because it was upsetting their whole way of life. And it was basically saying that their whole way of life was dark. In the Sanhedrin's case, they knew what this meant for their identity as people of the Jewish religion. And they didn't want that. Pilate thought Jesus was a harmless eccentric. He didn't think the punishment fit the accusations. But there were two titles given to Jesus by the people that he was being asked to confirm here. And very important to note that he himself never claimed either of those titles. The first question was asking him to confirm the title given to him as Son of God. And that was inferred by his continual reference to God as my Father, which Jesus often used to refer to his mission. And he expressly invited anyone to refer to God as our Father. He never claimed to be God, but to be one with God as his Father and ours. So when he replies, "You say that I am," he's not claiming the title. He's merely confirming that the title has been attributed to him by others. The second question is asking him to confirm the title given to him of King of the Jews. Again, he's not claiming the title, but he's confirming that the title given to him by others has been used to refer to him. And we know in the case of Jesus in his actual life, it was prophesied that he would have the eventual crucifixion that he had. But a lot of people think, well, why didn't he try to explain that he never claimed to be either of these things? And the reason is because he knew it didn't matter. People don't take kindly to being led to believe something as powerful as these two titles. And the ambiguity in Jesus's response reflects his own awareness that the questions are loaded and that both a yes and a no in either case would have meant his death, right? Why? Because of the projections. And he knew this. He not only knew that people were projecting onto him, that they were threatened by the very high and lofty projections people made when they said, you are the Savior, you're the Messiah, you're the King of the Jews, you are the Son of God. These things threatened the very existence of control and authoritarianism that the Jewish religion had over their people. And so he knew that. Of course he knew that. He knew that these were projections, and he knew that no matter what he said, it wasn't going to be the right answer, because people will always project onto you and onto him what they see. So the people that saw him as their Savior and as their Messiah and as their teacher and as their leader and as their guru, they were going to see him as that, because that's who he was to them. They were healing. They were changing their lives. They were leaving the lives they previously led, in many cases, packing up their stuff and leaving to go follow him. Their trajectory of their entire lives changed for many of them, certainly the disciples, almost instantaneously upon knowing him and his teachings. So this is the I am that you say I am power that we all have to understand when we are embodying our true self. But as I said in the opening, that this is a very nuanced topic, because we can understand it intellectually, but yet we still may have some areas where we are reactive to other people's projections. And that's really what I'm focusing on in this episode too, is how are we reactive to people's projections, and how does that affect us, and how does that maybe drain our energy? Because if you're reactive to what other people say about you, whether good or bad, you are allowing energy to be taken from you. Because if you not only know who you are, but you also stay in that place of knowing and never step out of it to react. Because if you're reacting to something, or you're trying to explain yourself to someone, or you're trying to make someone understand that you're not that, whatever that projection is onto you. Again, whether good or bad, and I'm going to go into that in more depth in a few minutes. But if you're being reactive in any way to the projections that other people make about you, you are stepping, even if it's only momentarily, out of your full strength. Because you're going beyond, you are trying to explain something to people that isn't going to change, because the way that they see you is through their own lens of perception. So there were people who were around Jesus, a very small amount of people, by the way, who saw his light. They knew who he was in his soul. They knew what he represented, and they knew that it was worthy of changing their entire life for him. And this is what bothered people. This is what really bothered people. Like, how does this man have the power to cause that kind of reaction? Like, he must be doing something wrong. He must be trying to take our power away. He must be trying to start a new religion, or he must be trying to get his own control and authority, because look at what these people are doing. You know, he's out there preaching and teaching, and it's like, we got to get a hold of this. We got to stop this, because it's outing us. It's outing our control, right? And so there were the few people that knew who he was, because they could see him almost instantly. Then there were the majority of people. I mean, you can imagine him existing today. The majority of people would crucify him, maybe not literally, maybe not on a cross, but for sure, they would be saying he's crazy, he's wacky, he's a cult, he's brainwashing people, he is doing some crazy shit, right? We know that. I mean, you don't have to be a rocket scientist or a psychic or anything like that to understand that if a Jesus exact man that existed 2,000 years ago was here today, that he would not be, you know, there wouldn't just be people going, oh my gosh, yes, there he is. There's our Savior. Not even close, right? So we hear these stories 2,000 years later, most of which were written 1,000 years after he died, right? So it's all very far reaching, and, you know, context is so important, but we don't have context in the sense that we weren't there. So we can look at a small period of history, because in fact, the New Testament only includes 53 days of his entire life, of his entire 33 years. And we're looking at this encapsulated 53 days as like, oh yeah, we know who he was. We know who he, like, we would have been this, we would have followed him. And some of us would have. Some of us absolutely would have, and some of us would have seen his light, and others would have been like, you're crazy, you're insane. We have this religion, we have our way of life, we are mutilating male genitals, we are slaughtering animals, we are eye for an eye, tooth for tooth, we are a vengeful God, and we are the chosen. I mean, all of those dark beliefs, all of those satanic beliefs would have been so influential because people were living that way for so long. And Jesus came to say, hey, this shit's dark. Like, he came to affect change. He flipped tables. He came to break open the spell that people had been under. So when those who control the spell, these big, huge authoritarian structures, these religions, when someone comes through as an outlier and other people listen, it's always a problem. It's always a problem. Like, if you think of a whistleblower in a company, okay, suddenly he's the bad guy, right? The guy disclosing the truth, the guy exposing the darkness is suddenly the bad guy, and he becomes the target. This is inherent in almost every authoritarian structure, that the person or the people who are the outliers, it's like the quote, black sheep of the family. Oh, she's the one that's not going along with the family control anymore. She's not the one willing to sustain the family abuse anymore. She's not the one willing to protect the abusive father anymore, right? And you see this pattern over and over and over again. So in order to have it all, to have your best life, one of the most important things is to obviously be on the journey of healing, to uncover who you really are, because most people don't know until you strip away everything that, quote, they say you are, right? Till you get to the core essence of who you are. So continuing on here, for those of you who have been subscribers to my Illuminations weekly forecast, about 1.5 years ago, I shared a story about a couple that I met on a plane from Kauai to Los Angeles. And I'm going to share it again here because, first of all, a lot of you don't know this story. And part of the conversation from that time came back today so powerfully, and I was able to understand it. Whereas back then I thought it was kind of a non-important aspect of the conversation. I realized today, 1.5 years or so later, it was actually the most important part of the whole conversation. This is what was so profound today. So to give you the story, I had been in the nail salon here in Kauai, and there was a woman there, and we kept looking at each other as if we knew each other, but neither of us said a word. And I would look down at my nails and notice she was looking at me. And then a few minutes later, I would look at her, and she was like looking down. She was getting a pedicure. I was getting a manicure. And we didn't say a word. She left before me, and she walked out, and she said goodbye. And she was very interesting to me. She had a very beautiful luxury car, and she was attractive and very vibrant. Her energy, I felt it to be very positive, and she seemed to be a bit of an anomaly. And I related to her because here in Kauai, I'm a bit of an anomaly. It's not very common for people here to get, the long nails and have like sort of that type of what you would see more like LA or New York, like nails and like hair extensions and microbladed eyebrows. She had all of that. She had designer clothes on. We were very similar, designer bag. And so it was very interesting because you don't see that on Kauai. So my first thought was, oh, maybe she's a tourist. But then I saw the car she got into, and I'm like, no, she's definitely not a tourist. So let it go. A few days later, I don't know, 3 or 4 days later, my son and I get on an airplane, an overnight flight to Los Angeles. We were going for golf, to a golf event, and get on the plane. We sit down in row 4. And the next thing you know, I see this woman, and she gets in the same row, row 4, but the other side of the aisle. We're in first class, and there's only 2 seats in each row. And then I see this older gentleman get in the row in front of her. And I noticed he was talking to her, but I just thought he was an older guy kind of hitting on her because she was with her son who was, young, maybe about like 2 or 3 years old and very adorable. And I see this older guy who kind of looked disheveled and just definitely nothing like her. And I was like, huh. And I was almost wondering, is he bothering her? Is she going to need help here? And then I soon figured out this was her husband. I'm like, oh, okay. So I'll tell you more about that in a bit. But she sits down and puts her Dior bag, above her seat. And again, I'm like, wow, she had a Balmain hoodie. I'm like, this lady is like some kind of alternate version of me in a lot of ways. But I don't ever think that about people. So it was very weird, for me, very, very weird. And so she started talking to me and striking up a conversation. I'm not a conversationalist on an airplane. I'm typically like headphones, music, talking to my son, not interested ever in having conversations with strangers. I don't like to ever, I never tell people what I do. When I'm with my kids, I'm just mom. I want to just be mom and not talk about my life, my job. It's such freedom for me to just be away from that all and be with my kids, right? So she started talking to me and I would take the headphones off and put them back on and we're having this conversation. And she was saying how she was going to LA. I was going to be there for a few days to get hair extensions done and then head to New York to literally the town where I grew up. And I was like, wow, that's weird. What are you doing there? And she said she was running and managing a conference for women who had been awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. Just like, what? And I'm learning more about this woman. And she's like, yes, we're coming together to figure out how to help women who are victims of war. And I'm just like, wow, like this is amazing, right? I was just listening to her and wanted to hear her story. And she was telling me more and more. And so she talked for a while and I told her I was from that town and I thought this was very interesting. And then her husband got up and he was kind of like stretching in his seat and he said that he heard my son talk about golf because him and I had been talking about golf, we talk about that a lot. And he said to my son, I golf. And turns out they knew some common people. And this one billionaire that my son plays with fairly often happens to be a really good friend of this guy, this husband on the plane. So I was like, wow, what a small world. I can't believe you guys are from Kauai. And she's like, I know. She's like, how long have you lived here? I'm like, 20 years. And she's like, oh my God, I don't know who you are. I'm like, I know. I keep a pretty low profile. I have a very small community of friends, mostly people who are the families of my kids' friends and, a handful of my own friends up on the North Shore. But, we travel a lot. And when I'm home, I like to just be with my family, And so we were just all shocked that we had never seen each other before. And my son had said, yeah, I've seen you at, the golf course, but didn't know who you were. And then, she proceeds to tell me that her husband meditates like anywhere from like 8 to 10 hours a day, every day. And I'm thinking, what? And she's like, yeah, he owns like the biggest amount of land of anybody on the East Coast. And he's, does all these things with meditation, opened up all these meditation centers. And I'm blown away by this whole experience happening on this plane at like midnight now. So I didn't talk to her at all about what my work is. I'm listening, which is typically what I do. I'm listening to what she has to say and interested in her story. I was actually kind of fascinated at this point. And at one point she just looks at me and she says, you're psychic. And I said, well, and my son answered quickly as he often does. And he said, yes, she is. And she said, I know, I'm not asking, I can see it. Also really just left an impression on me because it was accurate, but it was so confident that she said this. And her husband turned around and said, we were meant to meet. We were all, this was meant to be this night, this flight, this conversation. And at one point, we kept chatting and she said to me, the whole sky above you just opened up and all of these ascended masters are surrounding you. You're the embodiment of divine feminine on this earth. And I had full body chills and was kind of stunned. And that kind of thing rarely does somebody else say something to me that just puts me in a state of awe or just I was impressed. I was like, who is she? Like, how does she know this? Because if she knows this and she sees these things, she's somebody in a very spiritual sense. But I didn't know, right? I just was observing and trying to intuit who she was. And her awareness level definitely was very much higher than what I think the average person would assume based on looking at her. And I get that all the time myself. So I definitely could relate to her in a lot of ways. And so she said directly to me, she said, you have some really important teachings and at least a third of the world needs to hear them. To which I laughed. I was like, no, that's like way too many people. I have no interest in doing any of that. And she's like, no, you're going to write a book. And when you're ready, we're going to help you. And they proceed to tell me that her husband and his brother were integrally involved in bringing Chicken Soup for the Soul to the masses. I mean, these are like books that have sold millions of copies. And they told the story of how when that book was first published, it had a very small following and nobody had heard of it. People bought it, but it was not the behemoth that it is today. And so they continued on talking to me about publishing and writing a book. And at that time, a year and a half ago, I said, I have zero intention of writing. I don't want to write a book. That's not really what I see. And she insists, she's like, you will. And when you're ready, we'll be here. I'm like, okay, just kind of filed that. And here's the part of the conversation that back then I thought was completely irrelevant. I thought all the other stuff, I was like, well, maybe that'll happen. Maybe some of what they said, I don't know. But this part, for sure, I had concluded was not relevant. And she said to me, you have to accept who you are. And my instant reactive response, okay, this was me being reactive. This is only a year and a half ago. So this is just why I'm emphasizing how important this is for having it all, having your life and not being reactive. I reacted. My instant reactive response was, I do know who I am. And she just looked at me and she said, you're not accepting it. You may know who you are, but you're not accepting it. And she said, you have to be comfortable with people's admiration. That instantly triggered me. I was triggered. It hit a nerve. I have never been comfortable with that. Her husband then chimes in and says, with me, people all over the world call me master. And I instantly cringed because this guy, he meditates 8 hours a day and they do meditation things in other countries. And, he's not an online guru, but for sure a guru. Like there's people over the world that just literally bow to this guy and call him a master. And I cringed. I don't like that. I audibly said, ew. I didn't mean to say that out loud, but I blurted it out. It felt icky to me. It felt like ego. I instantly rejected that concept. I'm like, yeah, no. And I said, no, I would never accept anything like that, nor would I want that. And he has this very zen, calm demeanor. And he said, why? And I said, because that's ego. And he said, no, I never asked people to call me master. They do it because that's how they see me. I said, yeah, well, that would make me really uncomfortable. And he then said, yeah, but it's not about you. Why can't you let people have whatever experience of you they naturally have? And of course I was triggered by this too. I'm like, who the heck does this guy think he is, going around people calling him master? Like, ew, no. And the thing about it is I didn't feel any ego from him. And so there was a bit of a conflict within me because his energy felt so at peace and so gentle and so authentic, and as did hers. And yet the words coming out of his mouth were triggering me. And at the time I didn't connect the dots. I just thought that sounds like ego, even though that didn't align with what I felt from him. And I felt very genuine, authentic energy, but I still said no. And I said, I'm not like that. I go out of my way to constantly tell people that I'm just like them. I'm not special. I definitely don't think I'm better than anyone else. I want people to know this. I repeat this throughout my life. I've actually put a lot of energy into making sure that students, friends, anybody around me, community knows this. And he smiled. And it was one of those smiles where it could be annoying because it's a smile of like, oh, you poor thing, you poor child. Like that is exactly how he meant it, but not in a bad way. Like more like, oh, she doesn't even have a clue, but I'm going to give her one. He was not condescending at all, but it definitely could have been interpreted as such if I hadn't been willing to hear. And I was willing to hear, even though I was triggered. I was like, well, I know that this is a divine encounter, so I'm not going to ignore it wholesale. And he said to me, you are who you are. You know who you are, as does the divine. How other people experience you has nothing to do with you. And you need to allow that without putting any energy into trying to change their perception. The way they see you and the way that they receive you is based on their evolution, their life experience, their ability to see, their ability to understand, their ability to receive. It actually has nothing to do with you. And he then said, the thousands of people who call me master and literally bow at my feet, at which point I cringed again. He said, they have that experience of me. So why would I not let them have that? That's who I am to them. He said, I also have people who think I'm a nutcase, eccentric, billionaire, old guy, crazy person. And this whole time he just had this like smile on his face, smile with his mouth, but also with his eyes. And he said, I love both interpretations because I am what I am. And so are you. So going back a year and a half ago, I did not like this. I didn't believe this. I didn't think he made any sense. And so what I did in my mind, of course, always a mistake right there. I was like, well, this is definitely a divine encounter. And we proceeded to talk for the remainder of the time about a lot of different things. We talked the entire flight. We talked getting off the flight. We talked waiting for luggage at the luggage carousel. We continued to talk. We exchanged phone numbers and texted, beyond that. So in any event, I back then in my mind said, okay, well, all of this was a divine encounter and he's just, he enjoys being called master or he thinks that's okay. Like, that's fine. Like, that's his thing. He's not egotistical at all. So that's okay. I'm not him. I'm not going to be like that. I would never have that. I would never want that. But that's fine. I can get past that because these were definitely highly evolved people. This whole experience, I felt like I was in a time warp. It was an experience that when I close my eyes and go back to, I can feel it exactly as it was. And my son too, he's like, yeah, that whole experience was like just so intense and crazy, right? So fast forward to today, talking to my family about my evolution and heading into 2024. And I was like, I'm in such a different place today. I feel so anchored into who I am. And I feel like a 50-pound weight was lifted off my shoulder because I finally fully embody the acceptance of being who I am, regardless of anyone's projections. And it just hit me like over the threshold, right? After we moved into the threshold of 2024 and the frequency on the earth moved from lunar frequency to solar frequency, I felt a shift and I finally was able to feel what that was. And it was like, yeah, I finally fully embody the acceptance of being who I am, regardless of anyone's projections. And like all of you, I am who I am, and I am who God has ordained to be, just like he has done for all of you. And what God has ordained, no one can change. No one's interpretation of that has any effect on the truth of who you are. And all of the doors that God has opened, no one can close. No human has the ability to close a door that was opened for you by God. And likewise with your path, the path that is meant for you, no one can change. No one can alter. No one can even change even a little bit. The only way your path can change is if you cause it to change, you allow it to change, or you allow other people's projections to change you or to change your path or to do something different or to drain you or tire you out or exhaust you or get self-defeated. There's a whole host of things that you could do in reaction to other people's projections. But the projections themselves have zero, they can't possibly have an effect on your path external to you doing something. So if you are solid in who you are and you fully embody and accept who you are, your real self, and you're a clear vessel and that hollow bone, then no human can change that because your path is divinely ordained. And so again, I've always known these things. I've always taught that exact thing. This is not a new teaching. Those of you who've been around for 12 plus years know that I've been saying that from the very beginning, but understanding it intellectually and fully embodying it are two different things. So knowing I was moving into 2024, fully being able to embody this and accept who I am, regardless of anyone's projections, good or bad, I just felt so incredible, so amazing, right? So that's what I was sharing with my family today in this conversation. And as we're having this conversation, a massive download began to happen and Jesus was coming through, and this whole conversation on the plane with this couple came through. And also it was almost exactly a year and a half ago, actually getting close to 2 years now, around the same time that I had the conversation on the plane with this couple, was when I started to be defamed and lied about by relatives of a few of my students. And a whole smear campaign started, right? And it wasn't my students, it was family members who were disgruntled at the newfound courage my students had. And these were 9 women who had disclosed abuse at the hands of either their father, their soon-to-be ex-husband, or whose children had disclosed being sexually abused, physically abused, emotionally abused by their fathers. And so these 9 accused pedophiles and abusers, along with some of their moms, their mothers, and a couple random people, launched a full-on attack on my reputation, my work, my community, I'm sure most of you know about this. Some of you are new to this podcast and you may not have heard any of this, but it's so coming full circle. I can't even tell you how powerful this download was today, because when this first happened, 1.5 to 2 years ago, I first took on the role of the observer, and I said nothing and did nothing for like about a 6-month period. I remained quiet because I needed to observe. I'm like, okay, this is curious. What actually is this, And I didn't react. I didn't do anything actually, as a matter of fact, initially. And I took the time to witness what they were doing, which soon became very apparent. It followed to the letter, the playbook that abusers use, a tactic known as DARVO, which means deny any wrongdoing because they'd been accused. Attack, go on the attack the people accusing you and their supporters, which would be me, and reverse victim and offender. So meanwhile, they were being accused of being the offender and their wives and children were the victims, and they're reversing it, saying that now they're the victim, right? This is the typical abuser playbook, and they were using it on me. They flipped the script. They created a false narrative that rather than being the offenders, they were the victims. And, they were radically ashamed that their daughters, wives, and children had disclosed abuses. And I became the very convenient scapegoat because I was the teacher. I had teachings that empowered these women to finally leave abuse, leave abusive families, leave abusive partners, stand on their own 2 feet, or at least try to, and have the courage to say, I'm not going to be bullied anymore. And so, as you can imagine, when someone has control and authority over a wife, over children, when a family structure is set up in an authoritarian manner, and there is a head of household, if you will, that is a high-level narc and malignant toxic abuser, as these women had accused these men of being, whether it was their husband or their father or both, in a lot of cases both, because it's a learned pattern. When they spoke out about this, it was, okay, we have to try to bring down Liana because she's the one causing this, right? So they could absolve themselves from any guilt for the actual things they were being accused of by their own family members and project that onto me because it was my teachings that empowered these women to do something they'd never done. They had spent their whole lives being victims of these people. And they share these stories, all their stories, which are now out in the open in public. And so I didn't say anything for a while. And of course, as many of you know, I did start speaking about it very loudly. I continue to this day to do so. And they thought they could bully and control my behavior, just like they bully and control their wives and children. And when that failed, they reached into the bottom of the barrel and found, the only person willing to take on these lies and write a story about it in a publication that exists only for the purpose of attracting what I call the malignant fascination with other people's lives. And one of the things that came through today so clear was how this is sort of like a power grab from these types of people, especially people who would write things like this, or even people who would read things like that. I, at first, was saying to myself, this is crazy because it's not like I'm huge. I don't have a huge following. I'm certainly not famous. I'm not some of these other people they've gone after. Another spiritual teacher, female, of course, very successful woman who they just, tried to obliterate. And I'm like, I'm not anywhere near her level, right? So I always was kind of curious. I'm like, that's just so weird to me. And it's been weird to me for a year and a half. But today it came so clear when Jesus shared with me. He said, it's not about your fame. It's not about how popular you are. It's not about how many followers you have. It's about the power you generate. You could be completely unknown with like 200 followers. You still generate that same power. So when you look at somebody who would, let's say, write for a rag magazine or a gossip magazine on these like sensationalized stories and get people who won't even give their real name. Only one guy did. A guy, by the way, whose wife accused him of 20 years of abuse in writing. And I've shared that too. But these types of people generate they don't have like the battery. They don't have power that they're not generating anything authentic from their own self. They aren't contributing anything worthwhile to society. And so they do these power grabs looking at, look at people who all they do is write articles about celebrities like the Kardashians, or like people have whole careers off of that. Those people are not contributing anything valuable to society. Nobody needs 10 more stories about the Kardashians, right? They live off of that though. They're parasitic. These are what we call in society parasitic people, feeding off of people that actually generate power. And whether you like these people or not is not the point. You can love the Kardashians, hate them, not relevant. They clearly generate a lot of power. And so people who thrive off of that power, but are doing nothing in their own life to generate power, nothing authentic, they're not contributing anything, they can live off, literally, they can make a living off of this. There are people who make a living off of stories about these people and trying to drum up drama. And, if any of you saw the Meghan Markle and Prince Harry series on Netflix, it's the same thing. The people who drum up drama about them, there's whole news cycles about people that are at that level of fame. And it's a competition between the royal family of who's going to have the worst story written about them. And whole news rags exist off of this. They feed off of this. They're parasitic. They are the parasites in society. They are not generating anything valuable. They have nothing good to contribute to culture, life, anything positive. And they are not, they don't have, I'm sure they have some talent somewhere, but they haven't found it. They're not using it. They're just feeding off of the power that other people generate. And they grasp at straws for a semblance of attention that they clearly never got as children. And so this came through so clear today. And so for this whole past year and a half, 2 years, it's been like, I don't get it. The fascination with me. I'm not even huge. And I'm like, oh, okay. Today it became crystallized, this awareness and this whole conversation from the airplane, everything was coming into full view on this concept of I am who you say that I am. And so the people who joined in on the attacks were all sort of connected to these students of mine. And, I'll share a couple of specifics with you because it really matters, and it really helps you understand this concept as to why you cannot react to other people's projections and why you cannot ever accept anyone's projections of who you are. And once you understand who you are on an inner level, which I had done a long time ago, you then have to follow that up with embodying it, which I didn't do till like this month, right? So I'm hoping that my experience can help you do it faster than I did it. That's always my hope. It's like, it took me a long time to be willing to embody this. I really hope you guys can do this faster than me. So one of the women, it was a woman, curiously, who joined in on this attack, and her name's Sarah Lawson. And she actually went on a couple of crazy podcasts talking about me under the fake name of Justice, of all things. And she to me, was a true rando in the whole stream of events because she's the cousin of one of my students. It was just such a bizarre connection. I'm like, what did she have to do with this? And come to find out her backstory. So I'll just read to you word for word from my actual student who had this to say, quote, "Interestingly enough, Sarah herself was a victim of malicious sexual attacks from an ex-boyfriend. It was heartbreaking. He had a friend hide in a closet and videotape her and her ex having sex. There was a group of 15 guys at the time who called themselves Team Debauchery. And they had a joint email account. Her ex shared that sex tape in the email, and many people saw. She found out and she actually sued them. She isn't a stranger to being victimized, and that event was very difficult for her. One would think that you would understand what it's like to be involved with abusive men who scheme and lie as their idea of fun. It's actually really sad." End quote. I responded to her and said, "That's horrific. I can definitely see hatred of women inside of her. Her mother must have been a witch. I can feel her obsession with me and why my life is so fascinating to her. It's really so sad. You leaving Canada was so triggering to her because it meant she was left behind. And at least when you were there, you could both be miserable together. She could numb out and ignore. But when you left, that one photo of you in the car with your other friend and huge smiles on your faces represented so much freedom, which she doesn't have." And then my student replied, quote, "Her mom is very judgmental and narcissistic. I don't think Sarah ever felt good enough. But regardless, none of it is an excuse to attack a random stranger while also blindly vetting for another unknown man who abuses his children. Scratch that, multiple men who have done so. Yet, when the whole victims' voices thing emerged in Canada in 2020, she was advocating for sexual abuse victims. She can't decide what side she's on because the hatred exists within her. Taking children away from their protective parents because nobody helped her as a kid. Her father is my dad's brother, and well, my father raped me as a young girl. They both came from a very toxic house. Their mother was an alcoholic. She set her house on fire after passing out drunk and dropping a cigarette on papers. And their father was a dictator. Weird. My phone just autocorrected Sarah to Satan. I'm so sorry for what she's doing, Liana. I've been asking and asking for guidance on a name and a direction for what I can use specifically to speak up for all of this, to call out the insanity and the maliciousness of this. It is sad that she is in endless torture because I have in the past seen her spark and light. It is all gone, the darkest of dark." End quote. Then another that I'll give you an example of is a guy by the name of Kevin Lamy, whose daughter shared that she grew up in a Christian cult, born into a cult where all four of her father's brothers were in this cult until they saw the writing on the wall and they left. But that her parents and sibling and her ex-husband, a guy by the name of Timothy Jensen, Acacia shares, are still very much involved in this same cult, his parents as well. And she shared things with me that her father enjoyed killing animals and torturing them, and he used violence against their family pets when she was growing up. She gave graphic details of her father's sexual grooming and abuse of her as a child, which I've shared on Instagram, but we'll leave out here. I'm not going to get into the graphic details. But when she was a teenager, the cult he belonged to, she said, would recruit young people, specifically teenagers. They would bring them to cult meetings, get them away from their parents. I mean, these were underage people, right? All under the age of 18, getting them and saying that they should basically pledge allegiance to the cult and not listen to their parents. These were kids. And, she said also that her dad is a misogynist who would always denigrate her mother and her role as a wife, a homemaker, and a small business owner. And she shared that her father was involved in covering up the rape of a minor in the cult, for which the perpetrator actually served prison time. And she said, quote, "My father immediately hired the offender after his release from prison, putting my younger sister in close proximity to this sexual predator who had molested a dear friend I grew up with, then went on to molest his own sons and went to prison again. The offender has been released, and my father continues to support him to this day and maintain contact." Now, this guy, Kevin, is one of the people who formed this attack against me. And she also shared from actual screenshots that she had of conversations her father had publicly online that this man, Kevin Lamy, went on to contact another man arrested for kidnapping, a man named Steve Hassan. Now, Hassan is a grifter who has rebranded himself as a cult specialist. He had a lot of involvement in the anti-cult scams 20, 30 years ago, where they were basically thugs for hire by parents who wanted to, quote, get their children back. And, ironically, out of cults, and would pay these men to abuse, beat, intimidate, brainwash, go back to their families for thousands of dollars. There's tons and tons of online testimony from victims of this that were in very public court cases. There's a lot of that shared online, and they would pay these men to do these things. And, after a few arrests from these thugs and a loss of licensing for some of them, these guys went on to rebrand themselves as cult specialists. They had to. The grift had to change, for money. So now, today, for the cool price of up to $50,000, apparently, you can, quote, get your adult children back. And this is the lingo that these 9 men who were accused of abuse by my students, this is the circles they're connected with. And interestingly, about Steve Hassan, on his own website, he promotes a convicted pedophile, a man by the name of Anton Hein, who is currently, to this day, a fugitive in Amsterdam on arrest warrant from the United States. He was convicted of pedophilia with a young girl, family member, and Steve Hassan promotes his work. You can't make this up. You can't make this up. So the irony, Acacia shares that she was raised in a literal cult. She was sexually abused and raped by her father, and that her father supports a cult member who was jailed for sexual abuse of a minor, that he is a misogynist and degraded her mother. And when she started to take my programs, like many of my other students, she found her power. She distanced herself from her abusers. Her father teams up with Hassan, this guy that promotes a pedophile, and it charges these fees in his grift, right? And imagine the point being to, quote, get her back into what she describes as an abusive cult that she was miserable and abused in for the majority of her life. So why is this so important? And this all comes such a full circle today. This is the epitome. You cannot get a better experience of projection. And that's why I now see and have so much gratitude for what I've been through for the past 2 years, because it not only helped me get to a place where I can fully embody who I am and not react, but also for teaching, because ultimately everything that Jesus leads me through is for the purpose of teaching. And his life was a testament to teaching. Everything he did became a lesson. Everything he experienced became alchemized into a teaching. And so this scenario that I've been through over the last 1.5 to 2 years, it's the epitome of projection. This man, Kevin, this woman, Sarah, right? They're projecting, but this man, Kevin, he is someone whose daughter has accused him of heinous, horrific abuse. And she said he didn't allow her to have any friends outside the cult. And here he is projecting all of that onto my teachings, which are the very reason she was actually empowered enough to stand on her own 2 feet in her own authority and leave not only an abusive marriage where her husband was arrested for domestic violence, but an abusive father. So Kevin Lamy and Tim Jensen, they can only see me through their eyes. Sarah Lawson can only see me through her eyes. She's a broken woman. She never healed. She took that pain from what she went through, what her cousin shared with me that she went through, and from her childhood, and from the abuse that her father lived through that my student shared with me. She took all of that, and instead of alchemizing that into healing like my students do, she went from abused to abuser pipeline instead of abused to healed, which is the path my students take. And so this group of people accused of abuse with very detailed graphic accounts, right? They're feeling all of this shame because their truth is being exposed, and they lash out. They follow the abuser handbook, Darvo, as I explained earlier. They can only see me through their eyes. So literally through their eyes, I am that. I am what they are, right? Because they have controlled these women. They have been an authoritarian over these women. They can't see their daughters and ex-wives as strong women, as women who can make independent decisions and be sovereign. They can't even hold space for that. So the only way they can see me is that I've stepped in and somehow taken the role of authoritarian over these women. And there's no other possibility for them. Everything's black and white for them. And because they have been able to maintain control over these women for forever, since they were born, if it was a father, and then since they were dating. I mean, Acacia was dating Timothy Jensen when, she was 16 and he was 22. And she reveals some really disturbing things about that as well. And this was set up by her family from within the cult. That's the story she shared. So only one reality exists for these people, and it's through their glasses, their perception. And the only way they could see me, because they don't know anything about my teachings, they haven't done my programs, even though there's lots of free stuff out there. I talk about everything and it's very accessible, but they clearly haven't done any of that work. So they're not able to see anything other than through their lenses of perception. And that's the heart and soul of this teaching that Jesus brought through to me today. In having it all, having your dream life, having a life where you are abundant and free and happy and joyful and have loving relationships and having a passionate career and all of the things that I talk about, and that this podcast, She Can Have It All, is geared towards. It really begins with the understanding that you are who you are and I am who I am. And when you get to the place of not only understanding that, because you've stripped away all of the false projections, but you embody that to the point where you're not reactive anymore. Because there can definitely be a feeling of, well, do I need to try to convince people that I'm not a cult? The answer is of course not. Of course not. Because I have thousands of students in over 90 countries and 12 years. And, this cult noise came out of 9 men and their supporters who accused me of being what they are, right? And there are definitely other things and other people, and I am in active litigation at the moment. There's certain things I cannot talk about, but all will be talked about in due time. But it's important to understand that you can't react to people's projections. You have to be able to embody the fullness of who you are and truly, truly understand that to these people, you really are those things, right? That's the part where I got tripped up and where this conversation from the airplane 1.5 to 2 years ago took place, meeting this couple, where that came in today and started flooding into my awareness again, because I haven't talked about that experience in a long time. What tripped me up was that I wasn't willing to accept the good stuff either. And when this man, the husband, said to me, you have to allow people to have their experiences of you. You have to accept it. It's not ego because you're not causing it. And so, one of the things that I have experienced on the good end, if you will, in addition to thousands, literally thousands of unsolicited testimonials of how my work has changed people's lives for the better, I have a student who created a page which is called Liana Shanti Saved My Life. And on that page, people share stories of literal life-saving, like they were suicidal. And then after doing my work, they're not. They see a reason to live. And I had no idea this page was coming about. I was actually very uncomfortable with it when I first saw it. And I talked to my husband about it. And luckily, he pulled me back in off the ledge because I was like, I need to tell her not to do this, And he echoed to some degree what this man on the plane had said. He's like, let people do their own thing. Like, you can't stop people. Like, you can't stop people's opinion of you and their feeling. And if they want to pay tribute to you in this way, you have to allow it. Very similar to what I had heard on the plane. I'm like, I know, but this is just, it's uncomfortable. And, I went through the whole, like, people are going to think that I think this, or like, I go around saying I save lives, and my husband said to me, but you do. And I cringed. Again, this is sort of like my reaction to that kind of stuff. I just don't like it. And I just accepted that that was going to exist. And then I read through some of the stories, and some of them really hit me hard, and I cried, and I felt very grateful for my path and for being able to have that result, that life proof, right? And so that's been going on for a while. And when this came through today, and I reheard the whole conversation from the airplane where he said, let people have their experiences, accept it. It's not ego. It became embodied. I don't need other people to know who I really am, because I am who I am. And people will only know me in relation to their own lens of perception. They will know me more and more authentically the more they heal. And this is what I was talking to my family about today. I said, I see that so clearly now, that the more people in my community have healed, the more they see of the truth of who I am. And I have to let that be, and let everybody's journey, wherever they're at in their journey, let them have that, which I couldn't control it anyway. But it was almost like I was trying to not accept the good stuff and then kind of struggle with, well, do I have to explain that I'm not a cult, or should I write articles about this, which I never did. I continue to share the abuses that my students write about, and I share their letters, and I share their screenshots, and I share their information, because it's very important to me to continue being an advocate for women and children. It's a huge part of who I am and who I've always been. But it really came full circle today, in that embodying all of it and understanding that people project until they become a mirror. And until they become a clear vessel, until they become a hollow bone. And some people are never going to become that. And you will never be anything different than who you are through their eyes. And, I also was reminded today, or what came through today was, even with a few students who are no longer my students, which is normal, right? Not everybody stays with a teacher their whole life. And I had one student that came to mind today who was in my community for a very long time, and she struggled a lot with a lot of different emotional issues and healing issues, physical issues and whatnot. And it got to a point where I don't know exactly what happened to her, other than I can say it was definitely dark. And I didn't know this, by the way, I didn't know any of this until the very end of when she was no longer in my community, because I took her out of my community. But she was targeting pregnant women in my community, unbeknownst to me. And she was in a group, and she was finding out who was pregnant, and she would ask very personal questions. When's the due date? Do you know if it's a boy or a girl? Where are you going to have the baby? And again, I found this out at the very end, that she was doing rituals on people, on pregnant women, and her intent was very dark. I won't get into details about that. And she had gone and visited in person other people in the community and said, oh, let's get together, let's have dinner. And she went to their home, and very dark and nefarious things took place. And these people took it upon themselves to cut her out. They're like, this is dark. We don't want, it was crazy. We don't want her in our life anymore. And then she would also call up other students and, have these friendships that she formed. And she would whisper poetry that she had written about them over the phone. I heard about this. I'm like, what? This is crazy shit. What is this? No idea that this was going on. And I found out from my students, they were all having their own conversations about it. And, when you have a lot of students and a community, you're not micromanaging it, and psychic or not, you're not trying to tap into every conversation. And it's like, I have a life, I have kids, I have a lot of travel, I have a family, I have a relationship with my husband, and these are all things that are priorities to me. And my priority with respect to my students is my teaching, is my commitment to my work and to my path, not getting involved in little chit-chatty circles and conversations. I don't do that sort of thing. And so, I found out after the fact, when a number of people kept coming to me and saying, look, this person's doing this, this, and this. And I cut her out. She did this, this, and this, and I cut her out of my life. I stopped talking to her. I decided I didn't want her at my home anymore. I blocked her on Facebook. And it was enough people that had said that. Now, things like that have happened before. People said, I'm having an issue with so-and-so, and I cut her out. I'm like, that's your thing. Don't come to me with that. I'm not your mom. I'm not your kindergarten teacher. I don't do drama. I don't do gossip. Do not come to me with these things. If you're an adult, you're a grown woman. If you have an issue with somebody and you feel you don't want them in your life, then by all means, do whatever you need to do. But don't come to me for validation of that, because this person's in my community. And don't determine a relationship you're going to have with someone based on my relationship with them, because my relationship with people is student-teacher. And I maintain that space, and somebody you may not like or somebody that you may cut off doesn't mean I'm going to not have them in my community, right? And the only time I remove people from my community, which I have and I do, it's because I have determined that this person is a blight on the community or is not doing the work and has devious intentions towards other members. And that, sadly it happened. It's bound to happen. It doesn't happen a lot. I can count on my hands, on two hands, the number of times. In 12 years, there have been less than 10 people that I have actually had to do that with. And they were extreme cases. And I had people that would come to me and say, Liana, you're letting dark people in. Why are you doing that? They so wanted me to be their mom. They so wanted me to be the teacher, authoritarian teacher, and kick them out. And they wanted that. And I wouldn't do it. And And then sometimes, some of these people got mad at me, one person in particular, who I actually took her out because she was going down this road of, you didn't protect us. You needed to take her out. The poetry, she was not so affectionately called the poetry whisperer. And, she said, poetry whisperer, you left us in danger. And I'm like, it's not my job to shield you. You're an adult woman. You have to have discernment. And I was legitimately trying to help this woman. She'd been in my community for years. This was not somebody new. And this is someone who had struggled with a suicidal daughter and a lot of really dark stuff. And even a full-blown demonic possession at one point in her life that she shared. Her whole body was taken over. Her voice was taken over. Like literally something you've seen out of a movie. She shared this with me, an experience she had in a hospital type setting after an injury. And she had said to me, the only thing that helped me was, I remembered you said, if you're ever in trouble, call on Jesus. So I said, Jesus, help me, Jesus, help me, Jesus, help me. And he did, and he got me out of it. And all I could hear was your voice telling me that. And prior to that, she said she didn't really have a belief in Jesus, but after that experience, she did. So to me, that's a person worth giving my all to, because she's genuinely trying to pull herself away from darkness. And according to her, she had done that. So regardless of the fact that she had been having issues with other people, I had extreme patience with her that went on for a while. And it wasn't until I was told all of these things. And a lot of people didn't tell me these things because I have said so many times, don't come to me with gossip. Don't come to me with drama. And people weren't sure. They're like, is this gossip? Is this considered gossip? Right? And so it kind of went in the other direction. And it got to a point where she was really causing a lot of harm for a lot of people. And a lot of people were blocking her. And she joined in on this, I feel like this could be a cult. And I'm like, oh my God, she's been around me for like 10 years. And it was because to her, and it all makes sense to me now, to her, she was experiencing that because she was being ousted. She was the little girl on the playground that nobody wanted to play with. She was the girl who didn't get picked for the kickball team. She was being pushed out. People were closing off to her. People were blocking her on Facebook. People were disconnecting from her and no longer willing to talk to her, no longer willing to have her in their home. And she attributed all of that again to me because she never got out of the authoritarian power structure. So she believed through her lens of perception that I somehow was dictating this, was telling people, don't talk to so-and-so anymore. I've literally never said that to anybody, including my own kids who've said so-and-so did this, this, and this. I'm like, well, use your discernment. Do you feel like this is a person you want to have in your life? Is this person adding value to your life? Is this person draining you? Ask yourself the questions and go through the discernment filter. I don't even tell my own kids not to talk to somebody, let alone my students who are not my kids. And yet this woman had seen only that. She saw me as the leader. She saw me as, Liana must have told these people this, even though she had known me for a very long time. And she wasn't a student continuously for 10 years. She was, in all reality, she was a student on and off for about 6 years, more on than off, but she did have like a 1.5 to 2 year period when she had that really dark demonic experience where she wasn't in my community. And then she came back and I thought, great, she's moving forward. I was so happy for her. And she really did have a lot of light and a lot of gifts and a lot of abilities. And it was really sad for me. It's always very sad for me emotionally when I see somebody go down like that. But it did come to the point where I had to take her out of the community because it was causing more harm than any good I was doing her. Obviously, whatever I was doing wasn't working, right? Because she was getting darker and darker, and I have no control over that. No matter how much I want it, no matter how much I want somebody to have their best life and, access all their gifts and do great things and be happy and healthy and make a lot of money and have a great relationship. That's just not real. I can't make that happen. And so then it was like this other person who got really mad that I had let her be in the group for so long. So it was like, you can't win, right? That's what Jesus said. And what he knew is like, no matter what I say, they're not going to believe me. I am what you say I am. And to her, she projected. She had had a horrific mother, this student of mine, the poetry person, horrific mother, evil mother, super abusive father. And that's all she could see. She had done healing, but she backtracked a lot and backtracked to the point where she reverted back to that child who was abused by authoritarian, abusive parents. And she projected that onto me and could no longer see the love. And so that's the other thing that I want you guys to really get with this episode today on embodying who you really are. It's that I hear a lot of people say to me, I don't, about their own life. They'll say, I don't understand, Liana, because I was so loving to this man. I gave my all to this relationship. I really loved him. I really wanted him to heal. I really wanted this to work. How did he not see that? Or another student, who ended a marriage after 30 something years. And immediately he's in another marriage, literally 5 months later. She's like, I don't understand that. I don't get that. And that can sometimes become something that you start to embody and look at and go, did I do something wrong? Like what did I do to cause that? That's different than holding yourself accountable for things, which we all have to do, but you didn't cause someone to do that. You didn't cause someone to leave a marriage after that many years and have a new spouse immediately thereafter. And so you have to be really aware of that, to not embody that, to only embody fully who you are. And the more you heal, the more you'll know who you are. And nothing can change that. No human has the power to change that. Who you are is ordained by God. Your path is ordained by God, and no one can alter that. The only way, as I said in the very beginning, the only way that can be altered is if you allow it. So if you start reacting, you will allow some of your energy to be diverted. And so what I realized today in this radical moment of clarity was I, to some degree, have allowed a draining of my energy in both ways, either for the good or the bad, because I have gone out of my way to say to people, I don't save anyone. I'm not saying, I could say that till I'm blue in the face. And there's still a whole host of people who say, you saved my life. So I've expended energy literally trying to prove them wrong and say, no, I didn't. I don't want to hold that. I don't want to own that. I feel like that's ego. It's not ego. It has nothing to do with me. It's their experience of me through their lens, through their life proof. Whereas on the other end of the spectrum, it's the same thing. I did not put any energy into the student that I took out of my community. I didn't try to explain myself, or I knew no matter, because I knew at that point, no matter what I said to her, and if I had explained everything to her as to what took place, she would not have heard any of it. She would have just seen, oh my gosh, Liana's horrible. She took me out of the group. And to her, that's who I am. That's who I am. And so when you act in a way that triggers someone and it's not doing what they want, they will react like a cornered animal, an animal cornered that will lash out. And they only see you that way. They don't have the capability to see you any other way. And, one thing that I think is very important to say also, you always, in all situations, have a right, and sometimes it's a responsibility, but not always. You're not always obligated to say something, but you always have a right to share your truth and your experience. And I want to just touch on that before wrapping up on the I am who I am topic. When somebody has formed a projection of you, and they, especially if they are sharing it with other people or they are publicly talking about it, and you can come from a place of not being reactive, you have a right, and again, like I said, sometimes a responsibility to share your truth. And it doesn't mean it's going to convince anybody of anything. And it doesn't really matter if it does or it doesn't. But activating your throat chakra and getting your truth out there sometimes is very, very important. And it can have a positive impact on other people's lives. And so I have another student who has disclosed abuse of her father, and her father and mother ran a daycare with children for many years. And she came out with a lot of abuse, and her family went on the attack, again, following this abuser pattern. They attacked her, they attacked me, they joined in on, he was one of these 9 men accused of abuse that I shared with you earlier. But her mother got involved, and even her sister, a very, very tragic story. And they launched an attack on her and tried to discredit me first. And then when that wasn't working, they tried to discredit her and say she was crazy and she's making all this up, and really disvaluing her and her truth and her life and her memory and her life story. And she became very public, and she wrote many Substack articles and talked about this very vocally, and continues to this day, which was very important because in her case, her parents owned a daycare, and she's like, I want to get this out there to hopefully help somebody who may have been abused by my father. And if they hear my story, they can come forward. So she knew that it was part of her mission, part of her getting that truth out there. And a lot of the time people accused of abuse, they will react to that and they'll say, who does she think she is talking about this and airing all this dirty laundry? And, they should be ashamed for talking about this. They are people who believe it's okay for them to project their story and to create a false narrative through their lens, which we know that's literally what they see. And a lot of people who abuse have really blocked it out. And I'll tell you who especially blocks it out. The mothers who protect abusers. They actually live in a reality where they don't remember it. They block it out to such a degree that they have no more memory of it. That is a real thing that has been researched, that people do block these memories. These mothers can't handle the shame of having allowed their daughters to be abused and raped by their own husband. So in this case, she knew that she had to get this story out there publicly. She was on my other podcast, and she spoke her truth and continues to do so despite her family really trying to shame her into being quiet. And then their narrative changed a little bit to, how dare her and Liana both talk about this? They're using, personal information against us. It's like, no, this is what happens when you form a projection about someone and create a false narrative, and then the person is speaking up about their experience. And it's unfortunate that it is revealing things you don't want revealed, but that's reality. And so I wanted to make sure to say that, because you always have a right to share your truth, to share things people have told you, things that people have put you through. And there's so much shame about this. It's like trying to make you look like a bad person because you're speaking your truth while they're speaking their lens of perception story, right? It's never okay in their mind for you to shine a spotlight on their behaviors, especially if you are telling of abuse and victimization that you experienced. So remember that, even if you are embodying the fullness of who you are and you're not taking on anyone's projections, and you're understanding that they only see things in their unhealed way, they're not a clear vessel, they're not a hollow bone, they're not a mirror, they're a projector. So you always have to know who you're dealing with. Are you dealing with a projector, or are you dealing with a mirror? Most of the time, we are all dealing with projectors, because out in the world, most people have not healed. So that's something so important for you to remember. You will be so much more solid in your being when you embody the fact that you are who you are. Just as Jesus said, I am who you say I am. And he knew who he was. He said, I am, right? I am. That's the basic I am. And yet to other people, you are who they say you are. And I feel like Jesus's lesson is so profound there. You know, the I am represents the totality of all that there is. So it's the truth of who you are. And there is only one I am. And the I am is the one that you know within yourself when you get to that place. And it's timeless, it's eternal. And this is something that I think, again, can be very easily understood on an intellectual level, but much more difficult to embody. And when people have an experience of you that you do not like for whatever reason, again, like I said, it can be the good stuff or it can be the bad stuff. And you are either trying to prove them wrong, or you're putting a lot of energy into trying to make them not do that. Like, no, don't say I saved you, or don't say this, or whatever it is that you're not comfortable with for whatever reason. And for me, I had to get to the heart of why I was rejecting the good stuff, right? And it went back to that conversation on the airplane, which came through so strong today, which was this man saying to me, allow people to have their genuine experience of you. And so what's so profound about that is I had to realize and really understand and clear this fear that I had because, and I've shared this with people before, growing up, I had people who would say to me, you think you're better than me. And I never thought that. Like there hasn't been a day in my life that I thought that I was better than anybody. But all throughout my life, whether it was elementary school, high school, college, law school, you name it, people have projected that onto me. And I put a lot of effort over the last 52 years of trying to like say to people, hey, I don't think that. I don't think that. And I came to understand there's literally nothing I can do to stop people from thinking that, who want to think that. But when I was younger, I used to ask my dad, why do people say that, Dad, when I don't think that? And his answer won't surprise you, I'm sure, after listening to everything I've said for the past 90 minutes. He said, honey, they think you're better than them. They have low self-esteem. They have insecurities. They see you and they see all the things that you are and how you are and the family you come from and the things you have and your good grades and like whatever it is, doesn't even matter. How loved you are. He would always tell me that's the biggest trigger for pretty much everybody. How loved you are, how you are the most important thing in the world to us. And people see that when they interact with us. Because sometimes it was even people that were very close to me that I had hang out with my family and I thought were great friends. And they would say, you know, you think you're better than us. And my dad would say to me, honey, it's their own insecurity. And I'm really sorry that this is happening, but you're not going to change that because until they feel good about themselves, they're going to project that and think that you think that. So lo and behold, this is a lesson my dad taught me so long ago, but I still tried to figure it out. I was like, I don't get it though, but I'm telling them I don't think that. He would just say, honey, you're not going to change their mind because they don't feel good about themselves and you do. They don't feel loved and you are. You know, and then the litany of things that they were comparing. And he said, don't waste your breath. That was one of his famous sayings. Don't waste your breath. Don't waste your time. You're not going to change it. You're not going to change their perception of you. And these conversations went on throughout my whole life. And to this day, not anymore, not as of 2024, but literally up until the end of 2023, there were instances where I was like trying to repeat again and again, you know, I'm not any different. I'm not any better. I don't think I'm any better. Like, I'm not doing that anymore. It's exhausting. I'm not giving my energy to that anymore. It was nobody's fault but my own because I didn't see that that's what I was doing. And I hope and I pray that this podcast and this message, that you walk away from this saying that you know who you are. And if you don't yet, you're on the way to getting there. And you know that you also are who other people say you are to them. So if somebody says you're a bitch, or somebody says you're a cult, or somebody says you're a crazy, eccentric egomaniac, or you're a savior, or you are the most generous person on the face of the earth, or you're the most loving mother on planet Earth, or those are all true for those people. None of which has any effect at all, doesn't even move the needle of who you are, because who you are is ordained by God, and you will always be that. And no one can affect your path. No one can close doors that are open for you, whether they like you or hate you, and they want to try to close doors or create problems for you. If you don't allow that, then it can't happen. And when you get to the place where your internal state of being that you embody is an ironclad bubble, an inner fortress between you and God. It's only you and God in there, right? The whole universe exists within you. The kingdom of God is within you. And when you can fully be anchored in that I am every day of your life, then when people project, because they will, it's going to happen for the rest of my life and the rest of your life. When they project, you will not react to it. You may respond. You may choose to respond. You may choose to speak out. You may choose to not. You may choose to take some kind of action, whatever. You have a lot of choices, and you certainly have a right to do whatever you want with that information. However, choosing to respond is very different than reacting. And you will not change anyone's mind, by the way, no matter how persuasive you are, because people will see you in the only way that they can see you. Number one, if they are still a projector. And if they are a mirror or becoming a mirror, maybe they've polished off a few spots on that mirror, they will start to see glimpses of your true I am presence. So I hope that this message meets all of you where you're at in your journey today. And thank you all for listening. I really am so excited about this podcast and look forward to episode 3. Thank you so much. You can find me on Instagram at Liana Shanti, and you can find all of my programs for healing and spiritual programs at lianashanti.com. And for everything health related, healing candida, programs in women's hormones, men's health, children's health, brain health, dental health, and for my health coach certification school, you can find that on Instagram at HMI Nutrition School or on the web at hminutrition.com. For business programs, you can find those at 12dbschool.com.